the Planning Commission is interested in moving forward with. So I think, you know, the 530 was the number of what's allowed now. And I don't know where the commission feels the target should be, but I think that that's, like I said, if it's the lower end of what's acceptable, that's probably a good way of considering a target in this case.
Chris, are you ready to go ahead and take over here?
Yeah, and I'm sorry that I was late. Not quite sure why the Zoom link wasn't where I needed it to be. Thank you, Kent, and everyone for moving ahead here. You know, I wonder if it makes sense, rather than diving into the pros and cons of the development density target, to just go walk through quickly the other options, and then Mark, if you would summarize your opinion on them to help us guide our conversation, that would be helpful, please.
Sure. So yeah, the second thing that's in the memo here was, and this was an idea again, it was brought up back in November, and that's the creation of a hybrid residential district. And I think we talked about it very briefly in November, but there was interest from the Planning Commission in maybe pursuing this further. So what we wanted to do with this particular topic was get your feedback after we've provided a little more context. So the idea behind a hybrid district is that it would replace, or it would include all residential uses that are already allowed in our R1, R2, and R3 districts. So our 3 residential districts allow single family, you know, attached units, townhomes, apartment style buildings. The idea behind this hybrid district is that all 3 of those uses would be allowed in this hybrid. The district would then probably replace our existing R2 and R3 properties. Most of those are already built out, so it probably wouldn't have a lot of benefit in terms of development potential, but would probably help with administration of the ordinance. But the other thought was that some of these vacant R1 parcels, if they were rezoned to this hybrid district, would in turn have higher development potential. So I think what we're looking for in this item is, if the commission is interested in developing a hybrid district, you'd probably want to give consideration to which R1 parcels, if any, you'd want to see included in its boundaries. From our perspective, vacant parcels 10 and 11 on the map that we had provided could be potential candidates. These are the properties just south of Earlestown Road and to the east of the bypass. Those we think would make sense because you have Ashworth Woods right on the other side of the bypass. It would be a natural extension of the district, and you also have some R3 down along 322 as well that we could possibly tie together to just kind of make it all one continuous district there. Certainly could look at other vacant R1 parcels, but those are the 2 that came to mind, I think, from the staff's perspective up front. So our recommendation is with this, again, that you talk about the hybrid district itself, and if it has any potential application to the vacant R1 parcels that we've identified. So I'll move on then to the third item in the memo, which is the defining a minimum development density. This is, again, something that the commission seemed to agree upon back in November. You weren't in favor of having a maximum lot size, but you did seem to feel like there could be a reasonable application of saying that any single family residential development on these vacant parcels would need to meet a certain minimum density. So they have to provide lots that on average are whatever number you establish. Right now we have a minimum lot size of 7,500 square feet. So we're not talking about changing that. We're simply saying that's the smallest a lot could be, but that this density requirement would be all of the properties in a development would have to average out to that minimum density to meet the requirement. So if you say 10,000 square feet, you might have some smaller lots and some larger lots, but the average of the entire development would be 10,000 square feet as an example. And we provided a table here in the memo to kind of give you ideas of, based on the vacant acreage we have, if you established any of those minimum densities, this is how many units would theoretically be able to be developed on those properties.
Mark, can I ask a question here along those lines?
Sure.
We talked about Rocky Ridge and how the building lots themselves are small, but they use the open space, the undeveloped space to average out to a larger lot. Would that be something we would continue to do here as well?
Well, I think with that particular development, it's in an agricultural district, so that is a different development right where they were allowed to provide these small lots, but only with open space. I think where this is this 139 acres is really your last remaining, ability to provide suburban style housing. So I don't know that you'd want to have a trade-off with open space being required.
Okay. Okay. Well, I'm thinking with the west of Kaywood, with that large parcel that runs down to Linden Hall Road as a possibility. And when we were doing the small area plan about those last couple of lots, the Biddle property that borders up against Main Street goes back to the end of the Bowl property, whether we wanted to consider, smaller homes with greater density.
Yeah, and that's actually something I wondered in terms of the hybrid district, depending on what shape that takes, that might be a good match for the development that was envisioned there on the Bowl Mansion property and the Biddle tract, should they ever develop. I think that the property number 8, the one there along to the west of Kaywood, certainly any access to that would probably be provided through Kaywood or by a road out to Linden Hall Road if it's developed in the future. But the R1 portion, would certainly probably benefit from having a minimum density required, just so that we don't, it's a very large piece of land, just so it doesn't get, half-acre lots in there, and there wouldn't be that many lots in the end on that triangular shaped piece.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
I
Question,
was going to move on to the last item, but go ahead.
Mark, just a question on that. Could we do something with, let's say, man, if we move the square footage down to 6,000, but said, all right, we established a density so that the developer could trade off a little bit, that they could have a better mix of large lots and small lots in a large.
So I guess you're suggesting if we were to lower the minimum,
Right.
And you still established a minimum density that's required overall, having a lower minimum lot size would then increase the upper end a little bit too, because you could have.
Yes.
Is that yes? And that's a possibility. I know at November there was discussion about how 7,500 square feet already seemed too small. So I don't know if that's still a consideration or not.
But if a developer wanted to do some small houses, small, pocket type neighborhood, plus have some larger stuff mixed in with it, they might be able to make it economically viable for them.
Sure.
But see, it strikes me that we'd be taking a little bit of the conservation design concept and trying to weave it into the further development of what is now, very limited sewer service space, really.
Yeah.
The last of our sewer service space. I with a little more thinking about it, that's got potential. And Mark, your concept of those lots 10, 11, and I dare say even 8, which make up probably half of the space that we're talking about in terms of acreage. Those might be the ones where we could best think of applying this new kind of thought process and options to. since, you know, we're not dealing with them bordering already other existing properties. Because in my mind, that's something to consider, that, you know, people like in the middle of the hill having some kind of mixed use, or mixed, not mixed use, mixed residentials, type property types cropping up amidst the single families there might not be met with
Yeah.
very much a positive eye. Whereas
Well,
if you put it
Yeah.
out on the other property, it might be.
if we flesh out this hybrid residential district idea, uh, it doesn't have to all be townhouses. It doesn't all have to be 7,500 square foot lots. I actually think those developments are kind of interesting to live in, since you have a lot of single family or single person families with other families that have 4 kids, professionals, older people. It's a nice concept to be able to get those all on a lot, but not dictate too much to the developer, because actually it's going to be his money. But it does allow the chance of higher density. But I just don't know how you would flesh that out so that there would be an amount of houses or amount of people, or houses, same thing, in that kind of a district. So you could have half-acre lots, 7,500 square foot lots, some duplexes. Kind of reminds me of country places, except there's really no large lots in country place. But I kind of like that idea. I think that's progressive to go that way. But I don't know how you would stack it on the parcels that you said. Some of these parcels should be left alone because they are dead center in a residential neighborhood. But some of these parcels are not, and they could be a hybrid.
Okay, does everyone want to have Mark go ahead and discuss his last point about kind of providing increased development within existing R1 neighborhoods, and then we can sounds like we're going to be talking about all of them at the same time. So.
Yep.
Yeah, so the last thing, and this was a staff generated idea. This was something that, you know, Todd and I have been talking about a little bit here over the last couple of weeks, is would there be any merit to maybe looking at increasing development density in certain portions of the existing R1 district? I think our thought was a couple of these lots are located along arterial streets. And much like we have a corridor overlay district today, would it be a good idea to maybe say within a certain proximity to those arterial streets, you could maybe be permitted to have some higher density townhome or attached, semi-attached or semi-detached, however we refer to them in our ordinance, dwellings. So I guess like thinking of like Liberty Hill, where you have several units that are attached to one another, would it be acceptable to have those types of uses allowed in certain parts of the R1 zone if they meet certain criteria? Like I said, location along arterial street, maybe direct access to the arterial street from the development, things like that. So just another idea that staff had come up with as we've been talking about putting this information together for you.
Yes.
Mark, you included in the memo some interpretation of the pros and cons of each, or at least selected ones. Why don't you give us your own, sort of your own ranking, if you will, of these options? It might be a good starting point for our conversation. And Amy, Todd, if you have some other comments on the viability or practicality of these options, it would be helpful for us to hear those, please.
As far as a ranking goes, I think they're all, I wouldn't say they're all equal, but I think they all have equal potential. For me, the hybrid district, most certainly, if the planning commission thinks that there's a benefit to maybe considering this in some vacant R1 properties, I think a hybrid district would be fine with our existing R2 and R3 anyway, and it's probably something we should consider. But I think that applying it to R1 properties, at least a couple of them, would have a significant impact on the development potential. So I think if that's something the commission's interested in, absolutely something we should move forward on. I think the other two ideas in here, I think, again, are both, I think all of these are worth pursuing. It's just a question of how far does the commission feel comfortable going with them? Because obviously you need to consider potential impacts to adjacent parcels and adjacent neighborhoods. So I think the minimum development density one is probably the easiest in terms of not upsetting the apple cart in terms of what we already do. It just sets a baseline for what the developer would need to achieve for any new development coming in.
If we do
Okay,
this,
that's it.
if we do this to designate a hybrid R1, are we doing it just for specific parcels? You know, are we saying perhaps that the 10 and 11, those parcels that you mentioned, Mark, would be designated as a hybrid residential district, and then the rest of them would be left alone because of the character of the land that's around them?
I think that's definitely an option. I think the thing is, once we start developing these hybrid regulations, if it's what the planning commission wants to look into, you probably would then have to take a look and see where you feel most comfortable applying them. It could very well be that after we put this together, you say, you know what, it's a great district for our existing R2 and R3, but let's not expand it to any other properties. But it's one of those where it's still philosophical. What direction do we want to go? And then once we start figuring out the details, you'll hopefully have a better comfort level of how much further we take it.
Okay.
So let's open this up to questions and opinions here. Anyone who wants to weigh in, we'll take several chunks of time to deliberate this with some focus.
I'll start. I'll just I like the idea of the hybrid districts that we could discuss applying that to. We've mentioned, of course, 10 and 11. I think we could talk about 1, 2, 3, and 4 since they're adjacent to 45 or Main Street, and and then incorporate some of these other suggestions within the hybrid district about the minimum densities, allowing for multiple type unit types, and then as far as the other, of course, the other big property is what is that, 8 behind Kaywood there. Maybe we could try to set up some kind of minimum density for that property. I think we have to be careful that we don't try to push it too far, but those are the ones I think would work the best. I'll leave it at that.
8's a tough one for me because I just don't see the access to a road. I mean, Linden Hall Road's pretty bad. And that's a big development. Where would you bring all that stuff out on?
Yeah, I don't see, that's what I'm saying. We'd have to be careful about that one, not making it too dense. I could see allowing some flexibility for some of the density, maybe along the expressway, but again, yeah, it's all going to come out through Kaywood,
Yeah,
no matter how you do it.
that's a tough one. That might be a place where you'd want to have the bigger lots, just because of the roads.
Right.
Well, I'm for the hybrid. I'd like you, Mark, to work your magic and see what you can come up with on, just take like parcel 10 and see what you could come up on just that one to give us an idea what that one would look like. Because I could also see it on 1, 2, and 3. I'd love to see 5. That was a nice idea. That comes out on 45, 322. That has a lot of ability to come out on other roads too. If that ever is developed, you know what I mean? But who knows if that'll ever be in our lifetime,
What is your thought on 4?
That's kind of you got a lot of people's houses around that one. I think that one you might get some blowback on, do you think?
Yeah, unless you did it and combining it with, you know, allowing the greater densities, you know, away from the perimeters. And I'm not quite sure how you do it, but that's
Right where the
That's what I
dot
was-
4 is. Yeah, I don't know. And again, you'd be coming out on Main Street unless it went in coincide with 5 and you could have access out of that one somehow, if they ever connected, you know. Okay.
Those are two different properties. Are they two different property owners? Yeah,
For 4 and 5?
yeah.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
4 is the old Bickle place, right? Or Biddle?
It'll.
Yeah, it's below Biddle's old house. Yep.
Let me add here, Mark and I talked a little bit about, you know, where the hybrid district might be applicable. And we had some concern in our discussions about sort of going too far away from the existing R2 and R3 properties, because there might be a spot zoning challenge should we just plop a hybrid residential district someplace away
Right.
from where multifamily type dwellings are currently allowed. So while we thought that 10 and 11 were probably good fits for the hybrid district, since Ashworth Woods is basically right beside it and it's currently zoned R3, we actually talked a little bit off the map where Center Estates and Huntington Park Apartments are. PennDOT Stocking Shed and a couple other one or two other properties between the PennDOT Stocking Shed and those multifamily developments might be reasonable to expect redevelopment to occur at some point, and those might be prime candidates. But when you're talking about parcels 1, 2, and 3, and maybe even 4 and 5, there's no R2 or R3 around them at all currently. So, I mean, that's something we could ask our solicitor about to see if that would be a spot zoning concern. But those were our initial thoughts, and I thought I'd throw that out there as long as we're talking about specific numbered properties that we might want to apply that at right now.
Well, talk to the solicitor about that, about those, because, you know, right now there's a lawn and garden center on the piece of property.
That's for sale.
Anyway, yeah. Could you do that on 10, Mark? And see what it looks like?
Yeah, I mean, we can start putting together this idea of what a hybrid district would look like and try to mock something up to give you an idea of what development potential there would be.
And like you said, Mark, that could put some lines or some walls around where it is we might consider applying them.
Could one of you, maybe Todd or another staff, talk about the fourth or the last option of providing increased development through creating supplemental regulations? How would that work, and how viable do you think that is?
Well, I think, you know, how it would work is we'd have to first decide what criteria you'd want to establish for where you would allow this increased development options to exist. I had mentioned maybe, you know, using, you know, being adjacent to and having access to an arterial street might be one of them. And the reason I bring that up is you have parcels 1, 2, and 3 that are all located along Earlystown Road. Maybe if you allowed some higher density within the R1 district, but only within a certain, you know, distance from 45, and then, you know, somehow provide buffering between that and the adjacent R1 neighborhoods, it might be an option. It wasn't something that we fleshed out into any great degree. It was just trying to think of different ways we could kind of maximize each of these properties if there's a way to do it. At least ones that are kind of on their own and not like the one up there on the hill, number 7, which is or Bob Potter's property, number 6. It's entirely surrounded by existing neighborhoods. Trying to avoid anything too dramatic on those.
Yeah.
And honestly, we thought applying a philosophy such as that to properties like 1, 2, and 3, if there was a spot zoning concern, that would allow a different kind of development type there, still
Yep.
retaining the R1, the existing R1 zoning district. So that be more of a blend that possibly wouldn't be challenged by
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
And 4 could be moved into that as well, because there is still access off of Linwood that's not a circle down at the bottom of that. There is a right of way coming off of Linwood to be able to access that lot. So you wouldn't necessarily have to have all of the development back and forth on Main Street.
That's not a cul-de-sac.
That's not a cul-de-sac down there. There is still a right of way at the bottom there.
Right where R is, right?
Yeah.
In Drive, yeah.
Yep. Does anybody else have comments on this agenda item? I think we've asked staff to do a little look at what hybrid would look like. I think the supplemental regulations near arterial streets is worth exploring further. Don't need to shut off conversation, just ask me if anybody else has comments or questions on this matter at this time.
I think we got a good start.
Staff, are you good with this till next month?
Yep.
Okay, let's move on then, please. Before we do item C and accessory solar regulations, let me say hello to my good friend Rich Manning and new alternate planning commission member. Rich, I'm glad you agreed, and the supervisor said thumbs up to having you as a member of the alternate member of the planning commission. Thank you for volunteering to serve.
Yeah, thank you.
All righty.
Pardon?
What's that?
Great background, by the way.
Yeah, that's right. So accessory solar, the board was satisfied with what we had proposed, but had a couple of questions around height hazards and battery leakage. You have a good explanation here in the agenda about what the issues are. Let's talk about storage of batteries first, and staff's suggested rewrite of the text. I'll say, to me, it looks good and covers the concern, and it's probably a good additional factor to consider and to add into this accessory solar regulation.
I have one issue with it. So on the first page on 12-24A, the first thing, power for sale energy to other users, all those provisions shall not be interpreted to prohibit the sale of excess power generated from time to time. Why do we have from time to time in there? It's like kind of a weird thing to have as a rule. So I was looking it up, and the U.S. government requires that West Penn Power accept solar energy. And then I looked up what our governor said about it, and they are required to buy your solar energy. So those are both laws. Now I know they have the meters that, they only give you credits on your meter, but that's not really true. If you actually generate more electricity at your place than you use within a year, they do by law have to send you a check. So I'm just wondering that maybe it should just read excess power generated to the local utility company. I know you don't want to have people selling power to their neighbors, but it just seemed like an odd thing to say.
Well, I can say I know we got that language from a number of different model ordinances, and I don't know if it's that crucial to have it in there. I think probably the one thought is that it is kind of reinforcing the idea that the system shouldn't be sized in such a way that it would constantly be selling power back. I mean, obviously, if someone puts in a big facility and they have a bunch of people living in their home, and then home is sold and one person lives there, maybe there will be always being power sold back at that point because the new homeowner won't use as much power. But I think the idea here was it was supposed to at least encapsulate that idea of not too big to constantly be selling power back all of the time.
Well, my point would be, how do you know? How would you enforce it? And it's really not true, because you can make a energy net house now, and solar panels from 2006 used to create about 150 watts per panel per hour, and now they're about 380. And so if they go just like they do with LED TVs, they probably will get up to 500 to 600 watts within the next foreseeable future per panel. So actually, on a ranch house that is built today with foam insulation and energy efficient appliances, you could have a product to sell. You could be not net zero, you could actually be producing more power than your house needs. And so I just did like to see that in there, because I see that is going to be the future. And it's, to my mind, it's a rosy future, because the more power we make, wouldn't we like to have it?
So I guess, I mean, I think the intent of that was to say that the use of the solar use would be primarily for the given for the given property, and that the primary energy would not be going to others. But are you saying that if they could produce, say, 5 times as much as they need, you're okay with them selling that?
Yes, I am. I don't think that is necessarily going to happen, but I could see that they could actually make 1 time more than they need on a residential property in the near future. And I see no reason why if they're going to make the expense of putting those solar panels up, why would that be a bad thing?
The other thing I would say, as long as what they're doing is primarily intended for their property. I mean, if it gets to be that they have enough room to create a, more of a commercial type use, that's what we got to be careful of. So I can see, I mean, I would still like to see some wording in there that says that the primary use of this accessory solar is as an accessory, because don't we say that right in the beginning somewhere?
First line.
First, yeah.
Yeah, so I think it's primary as an accessory, and then I guess if we want to allow, I guess, I don't know, that's a tough one to figure out.
Well, it's interesting to me that if I had a half-acre piece of property and you would allow me to build a 30 by 20 garage on it, 40 by 20, 50 by 20 garage, I would be allowed to do that. But if I was to take that same amount of land and put up solar panels, and then I would not be able to sell my excess electricity to the grid, I'm taking up the same piece of property on my half or 3 acre piece of property. You let me put up that, but you won't let me put this up?
Wait a minute now. Now you're creating an industrial use, in my opinion. So let's not get carried away. I'm all right with dropping. I'm all right with dropping this time to time wording. That would be fine as far as I'm concerned. But I would want the rest of the wording in point A to stay the way it is.
Yeah, and I would add too that I think if we start talking about allowing somebody to have twice the solar panels that they actually need to accomplish the accessory nature of what we're proposing to allow, who's to say that a number of people are going to stop at twice? who's to say that if 35 or 40 panels, which is typically what I'm seeing on rooftops in the last couple of years with the zoning permits, if 35 or 40 panels is good, but they have room for 150 and they have the money to pay for 150, who's to say that a bunch of people aren't going to do that? And you might have 2 or 3 houses on a block that are comprised, half the property is solar panels. That's I think what we're trying to avoid. And if we start saying that, we're going to allow this as more of a primary use than an accessory use, that somebody can actually make money off of this, and that it might be an industrial use, to agree with George, I think we're getting away from the intent of what we started with.
And
Hmm.
also, I'd just like to add that the Board of Supervisors reviewed this ordinance and they're fine with these regulations with the exception of the 2 minor questions that they had. So I don't want to see us changing any of the other language, because then it really needs to go back to the board and be another discussion point. I think, we don't want to be encouraging someone to create an industrial use with the solar. We want to keep it as an accessory use. The utility grade solar is something we're going to be discussing later this year. So I understand the concern from Jeff, but I think we should leave that language as is, because the board did, they did discuss this and they just had 2 minor comments, and I think we want to move this forward.
My
Another
only
problem-
question,
Go ahead.
my only
Another one
question or comment is, Jeff, let me just say that I think what I hear you saying is sound, and I'm wondering if there's a way for us to perhaps consider adding some language that focuses on changing technology and some way to almost define what accessory use for the property's needs are, so that there is some shifting, there's a shifting scalability, if you will, to this accessory. Because in 5 or 10 years, there could be a very different calculus to how much electricity is generated from a few solar panels. And I just want to make sure that the language accommodates that changing landscape.
Yeah, I would suggest that at that point we amend the ordinance. That's what we do generally whenever technology or building standards or something else changes as time passes. We update our regulations to accommodate those things. So I think we could move this forward with the language that we have in now that addresses the technology that we have now. And if in 5 or 10 years people can produce twice the electricity from the same surface area, maybe that's something a future planning commission and board and staff have to address.
Yeah, and remember, these ordinances are not written in stone, right? So just like our wireless facilities ordinance, when we did that, it was a cell tower ordinance. And then all the technology changed and we have a wireless facilities ordinance, and all the technology continues to change. And we're probably going to be amending that ordinance in the not too distant future. And we just adopted that in 17 or 18. So
Right.
I think we need to take the ordinance that's the snapshot of what we have now and what we want to accomplish now. And then as this technology changes, again, it's something that's fluid that we can look at changing our ordinance if we need to.
Put a Post-it note on A and expect to revisit it in a few years, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
So Jeff, if we take out this time to time language, are we good with this and can move on to the height hazards part of this conversation, or anybody else?
Chris, I don't think we should take out the time to time language. I think we need to leave that in.
Okay.
So that it doesn't have to go back to the supervisors.
Yeah, I think if you take it out, you're
Got it.
changing the intent. I think leave it in, and then
Yeah.
as things change, that's one of the points we can go back to in the
Got it.
future and say,
Okay.
we'll fix it.
Yep, that works for me.
What about mobile? I didn't see anything in here. I saw everything was a structured thing. It was either mounted on the house, it was mounted on your shed, or it was mounted to the ground. But if I have a 30-foot trailer and I put solar panels on it, I guess I'm not on any of this. I can do what I want. I
As
just
long
did
as
that.
it's a license, as long as it's on a licensed vehicle and it meets all those standards, I guess you could. If it's a stationary location and it's a structure, we don't have any regulations that uh, delineate between what's temporary and what's permanent. Technically, anytime a structure is moved or altered, you have to get a new zoning permit. So if that trailer's on your property for the sole purpose of holding solar panels to generate power for you or for sale back to the grid, anytime you move it, you have to get a new zoning permit.
Well, if it's mobile, I just had a 20-foot trailer put in my backyard, and I looked in our zoning regulations, and there was any reason that I can't make the guy move it, so I'm not going to bring it up. But I was looking at it thinking, my God, if it was just solar panels, it's on wheels, he could move it around in his backyard anywhere he wanted to, aim it toward the sun, and we don't have any regulation for that at all, right?
I don't know that that's true, because if it's a trailer, it's got a license on it, I'm assuming. And as
Yes.
long as it's inspected, it can be taken out on the road. If it's a solar panel display, that's something different. It's no longer just a trailer sitting in your backyard.
Well, would the trailer be hooked up to the electrical grid either? Because wouldn't that require a building permit to do that?
I don't know.
I would think if you're wiring it up in any way to be able to generate power for the use on the property, that would require some type of permitting to do that and possibly move it every time too.
Right.
Well, the trailers that are used for construction are brought home and plugged in, so they take power from the grid. All they'd have to do is give it back. It just makes your meter run in the other direction. And you could park it within the 8-foot boundary of your property line also, couldn't you? Because it's mobile.
No, like I said, if it's a structure that's intended to be used to collect solar rays and to distribute it to your house, like Mark said, you need to get a permit. We would consider that a structure, so you'd have to meet all the setbacks. So you wouldn't be able to put it right up against the property line.
I thought you could put a shed up against your property line as long as you could pick it up with a forklift.
I hope you're not going around telling people that, because that's never been the case. Like I said earlier, we don't have any regulations for what are temporary or permanent structures, and when you move it, you need a zoning permit. And sheds do have to be a certain distance away from the property line, and that varies depending on what the size of the shed is.
All right, just something I caught. I just could see that happening. I'm just wondering. Sorry.
I think I hear you. I think I hear you wanting to buy a bunch of trailers and have some
Put solar panels on
business there, Jeff. Yeah. Let's move on. Let's move on to the height hazards conversation, please.
I just have one question about the batteries.
Okay.
Are there any standards in the industry stating what those enclosures or sealed containers are supposed to be? And if there are, should we include anything to that effect in the ordinance, that they should at least meet a minimum industry standard?
I did not find anything in regards to there being any industrial standards that I found in any ordinances that I looked at. The language that we had previously, before we added this last sentence, was pretty much verbatim from several model ordinances and existing municipal ordinances that we found. So even what we've added is kind of a step beyond. There may be building code requirements for how batteries are stored if they're being used to store power before transmitting it to the grid. I don't know, but I wasn't able to find anything in terms of an industry standard for these.
So this might be something we put a Post-it note on as well, so as the industry evolves, we keep track of it as well.
Yeah.
Okay. A yield.
Why don't you just require that the shed has to be approved by a designer or an engineer. Because they are dangerous. They do blow up. I've seen them. I've seen them melt in the military too. It's pretty bad if they're not kept in a reasonable fashion. They're pretty dangerous.
Well, I think constructed in a manner that prohibits the leakage of hazardous chemicals is pretty comprehensive.
Yeah. For the time being, at least.
If it doesn't prohibit the leakage, then it's not meeting regulations.
I have another comment I just wanted to bring up. It's just a difference in the wording between the ordinance itself, item E, and what you have in your memo. You say that you start off when the solar system, energy system utilizes a battery system, and then you say that is stored outdoors. So did that get added?
You know, I think it did, and I probably forgot to underline it because that was a comment that Todd made, and I don't think I remember to add an underline there after he had sent me back my agenda text. So yes, the word outdoors was added because it seemed to be that was where the concern was with it leaking into the ground.
Okay. Other than that, I'm fine with what you have proposed here.
Well, sorry to split hairs here, but why would we want more leakage control if it's outdoors than not outdoors? Why don't we just take that out?
I think Todd, do you want to jump in on your thoughts there? I see you unmuted.
Yeah, Mark and I talked about this, and we thought that there might very well be some building code requirement for the indoor storage of batteries already. Although we did discuss the fact that you probably wouldn't want an indoor battery leaking any more than an outdoor battery. We also wondered a little bit if it was more likely that an outdoor batteries that were stored outdoors would have a more direct route to wells and to other things, and then would indoor batteries, because obviously you're going to have concrete floors or some other barrier that you're going to want to be watertight if those things are kept in the basement anyhow. So while conceivably they could still leak into groundwater from the inside, our thought was it was more likely that outside leakage would cause more damage.
Okay, I'm hearing no other comments on this. Let's move on, please. And it looks like staff is suggesting we do not change the height hazards language. Comments on that suggestion, please. Or questions?
I mean, I just think if you got a panel down where, you know, an animal or a child can mess it up, then you probably have more problems than an ordinance can fix.
I mean, are we looking at solar panels becoming the next swimming pool as a what do they refer to that as, a something in the way of a nuisance?
Yeah.
Attractive nuisance. Yeah.
Having to fence your solar panels like you have to fence your swimming pool. Attractive nuisance, you know. My feeling is that if you're putting it on your own property, you're accepting the liability for it, correct?
Yes, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
Or your
Do they have
homeowners.
rounded corners or something?
And I think it's a slippery slope as to deciding on what that number ought to be, what that height is. And I'm
For you, absolutely.
there, that is just a dangerous territory. And so I agree that as is sufficient for this ordinance.
Yeah.
Come to your township insurance agency.
But that's the point. It's not even the township. You know, we're talking about this being on private property.
House, right? Well, your house, right?
Exactly. So it's not as though the township has to accept any liability for it.
Edgar Snyder would disagree with you.
Well, there I go. There's the attractive nuisance, right?
And that's probably a good sign.
Right.
Yeah, common sense defeated once more. I mean, we can just buy a bunch of tennis balls and people can tape them to the bottom of their solar panels so their kids don't get concussions.
Okay, anything else on this? I think we've heard from a couple of people. Anyone else have comments on this, or we are okay to move on with the language not amended for heights? Okay, hearing no other comments. Amy, that's back to the Board of Supervisors.
Yeah, we'll put that on their March 8th agenda, and then if they're okay with it, they'll send it forward for public hearing and an adoption in April.
Okay, let's move on to item D. You want to walk us through the couple of items that came from our meeting late last month, please?
Sure. You guys met with the supervisors on January 27th, and we talked about your 2021 work plan. We also talked about the solar ordinance, which we just reviewed, and the village zoning district amendments. We'll be advertising the village zoning district amendment ordinance for their March meeting for public hearing and adoption. It sounds like they're all on board with the changes that we made, and this kind of comes full circle because it was last March when we had, March 9th, when we had initial discussion in the public hearing on this ordinance. So it'll be nice to get this one done. There are some property owners within the village that I think are waiting to do some things to their homes and they haven't been able to do it with the existing regulations. The 2021 work plan was approved by the supervisors. I don't know if y'all have it with you or not, but just briefly, the first item is the review of the residential zoning district, which you guys are working on now. The sign ordinance review is something that's going to be initiated at a staff level with the solicitor because that involves a Supreme Court decision and some legal issues. And we have pulled some model ordinances, and we're going to pick a Friday. Todd doesn't want to pick a Friday, but we're going to pick a Friday to sit down and go through, because I feel like that's a Friday project, to go through the sign ordinance and get what we need to the solicitor. The utility grade solar is another thing that you'll probably see the first half of this year because we're waiting on some information, the toolkit, to come down from the Center Region Planning Agency. Once that comes, we'll have some more discussion. And then the one item that I think probably I'm personally the most excited about because it crosses you and the Parks and Rec Committee, and I think kind of connects some things that we've tried to do over the years, is the update of the official map. Supervisor Lord talked about how we're really creating recreational networks within the township. And I really like the idea of that. And I really love the idea of being able to update that official map and use that official map to sort of memorialize these recreational networks that we want to create. And, you know, going back to what he said about, he was very concerned at the meeting about how we're going to get the public involved. I think there's some great ways to get the public involved through technology, but I also think this is one of these things that this summer, open up the door to the maintenance facility, open the gate, invite people, spread it out in the parking lot, let people walk around, talk to them, get their thoughts and their feelings. And they'll be right near one of these recreational corridors with the Tussey Pond Park, the mountain biking trails, Country Place Park, and that proposed path off of Bull Avenue. So I think that's exciting. And that's something that, that's another one that I think maybe we'll try to do a joint meeting with you guys in the Parks and Rec Committee when it's warmer, and maybe we'll do that one outside and everybody can kind of be in a park together and spread out and just devote it to talking about this and working on this item. After that, I don't think this is overly ambitious. I think the residential zoning district is going to take us a while, but I don't think your first 4 items are overly ambitious. We're going to look at the remaining zoning districts. I know Supervisor Graham mentioned the buffering regulations, which is something that I know at a staff level we've heard a lot about, and I know with our own maintenance facility we've had to put in a ton of trees to meet the buffering regulations, so that's something we'll look at. And then getting you some more continuing ed presentations as we can throughout the year. But I think you guys have a good agenda. I don't think it's overly stacked, but I think you guys will accomplish a lot this year.
Thank you for that overview and briefing. If I could ask for you to expand just briefly on the sort of the aspirational aspects of the official map, that it's been 12, 13 years since the last official map. For those of us who are not familiar with what potential it brings and planning heft, shall we say, that it holds. Could you talk a little bit more about why we have an official map and how it's used and what this trajectory might look like?
Yeah, so, and I'll have Mark chime in too here because some of this is in the municipal planning code, but the official map started actually before I was in the township. So it started, I think, 2004 were the discussions. And then I came in 2005 and we finally finished it in 2008. And the idea behind an official map is you want to show future road connections, future open space, future parkland, future trail connections that you would like to see within the township. And the idea being that if we have a developer that comes in and one of the items on that map is within their plan, then there's a time clock that we are allowed as a township to start where we can say, look, that road connection's on our official map. We can either put up the money and do it ourselves. Would have a year to complete that connection, or we can use that as leverage with the developer. What happened with our official map, and this is not a slam against anybody that was here in 2008 when this happened, we had a different planner at the time. Our official map became, and I saw this working with the Parks Committee back then, it became, let's throw all the spaghetti up against the wall and see what sticks, and then let's put it on the official map. Which is fine, but we have things on there like a bike path on the Bullsburg Pike that will never happen, because we would have to take a heck of a lot of property along the Bullsburg Pike and have the money to do that and be really unpopular with the residents there, right? So it's not realistic. In the ensuing years, the township put in dedicated millage in 2015 to buy maintenance equipment. We bought all the maintenance equipment we needed, and we morphed that millage into 0.3 of a mil for maintenance equipment and 0.2 of a mil for special projects. And Supervisor Harden and Supervisor Lord and a couple of the other supervisors said at the time, you know, we need to use this because we had tried to do the open space tax back in 2012, and that was defeated by the voters by 36 votes. So the supervisor said, hey, we want to do something with open space. Like even though the voters said no to the tax, we still want to do something. So updating the official map then gives us a roadmap where we can say, hey, we have this special projects, you know, millage that's bringing in $40,000 a year, and then that grows every year with our taxes. So, hey, let's use that money to do item number 8 on the official map, which is a trail from Fairfield to Harris Acres or whatever it is. But then we can say to the public, like, we did this process, we updated this map, this is what we're intending to do, we're going to save some money, so we have a pot of money to do some of these projects. And I think from my side, I think the more transparent we can be with our residents and the more we can use these tools before us to say, because when we put the dedicated millage on, we had a resident from Linden Hall who came to a meeting and said, you're just putting the open space tax on, that's all you're doing, you're sneaking it on, you're sneaking it on. Well, no, at the time we really needed to buy trucks, like we weren't sneaking anything. But I understand the concern. She voted against it. She's very concerned. But now we have a way to say, look, we're not necessarily raising your millage at all, but this is what we're planning to do with it, right? And this is how we want to use it. And also, if we want to go, you know, for grants or other things, we have a plan. Like, we're trying to do certain things within the township, and we have a plan we can show funders to help us get funds. So that's kind of why I think it's so exciting, just because it's evolved so much since we did it back in 2008. Because we didn't really know what we were doing back then. I mean, we did, but we didn't really know what kind of a tool it would be for us. And now I think we can fully utilize that tool. Mark, did you want to add?
I have nothing to add. I think that's a good summary of what an official map is and how we could better harness it if we're going to use one.
And it's a wonderful it's a wonderful way to use to work with the Parks and Recreation Committee and public open houses or whatever, to really involve, you know, a broader cross section of township residents in this visioning, not just exercise, but visioning tool, planning tool.
Yep.
Great. So thank you. We have a good work plan ahead of us. I'm excited about getting together in person when the weather gets a little nicer and maybe having some of our meetings at one of our parks, perhaps doing some site visits in addition to these other continuing ed items that are listed on the plan. Does anybody else have comments on this, the Board of Supervisors meeting from last month and a couple of items that came from that, including the work plan that we just talked about? Hearing none, let's move on then to agenda for March, and then some reports and recent actions by the Board of Supervisors. So it looks like we'll have R1 density on next month.
Mark or Todd, anything else?
Yeah, you may actually have a plan on the agenda. If you're familiar with where Kaywood North is, we got a plan for some estate lots that come off of a extension of Montclair Lane that we'll be performing our second review on. If they can reduce the number of comments and address most of what we've talked about, that'll be ready for the Planning Commission at your March meeting.
Is that empty space running down toward Linden Hall Road that has a cul-de-sac on it right now?
Where that cul-de-sac for the new street that was put in Kaywood North ends, that is one end of what is the open space lot, because it's a rural clustering development.
Okay.
Basically, three lots about twice the size of the Kaywood North lots are going to be on the opposite side of Andrea Way, which is furthest back street in Kaywood North, and then the rest of the building lots will be off of a cul-de-sac that's being put in the extension of Montclair Lane.
Okay. I wondered what they were going to do with that down there.
Amy, if we just have the R1 and this possible planning proposal ahead of us, what do you think from our work plan might be included in March? Is there more we can roll our sleeves up on the official map, or review of remaining zoning districts, or perhaps a continuing ed segment that seems timely?
I think maybe we'll try to find a continuing ed segment for you. We'll see if we can maybe find something. I know we've done a lot on solar, but maybe we can find something else on solar, on utility grade, since that should be coming from the region. I don't want to move forward on the other zoning districts till we finish the residential zoning districts, because
Yeah,
that's
okay.
still
That's
pretty
fair.
big to tackle. So, and I want to wait. I would like to do the official map stuff. I know Mark and Todd and I need to talk about that some more, but I would like to start that at a joint meeting with you guys and the Parks and Rec Committee, and have that just be the focus of the meeting. And since you guys have to work on it, and then can kind of get on the same page.
Okay. That sounds like maybe timely in April or May.
Probably May. The Parks Committee does a parks tour in April usually. Now, we split it up last year because of COVID, but when they do that, that takes like 3.5 hours, and that's a pretty long night for them. So probably would look at May timeframe. Plus then the weather should be better, hopefully by then.
Let's hope.
Okay,
More vaccinations by then.
that's right.
Yes.
Anything else from anybody in the meeting here regarding the agenda, the draft agenda for March? Okay, moving on to reports. Amy, George.
The Center Region Planning Commission met on February 4th. You received a summary of this meeting on February 11th. They do a really nice job of presenting concise bullet points and summary information. And so if you have not taken a look at the summary and you're interested, there are some nice things happening at the regional level, including the development of the climate action and adaptation planning I believe they're a committee, and there'll be a planning process that's happening. What we received a presentation that alerted us to the notion that this area needs a boost in climate literacy. And so there is going to be some effort on building more public awareness on climate change so that we understand a little bit better about what's happening and why it's happening. And it seemed strange that this would be happening and that we would need such a thing, but there is some good data to support the fact that we just aren't as knowledgeable in climate literacy as we could be. And so I believe there's even an intern who's being brought in to help build more public programming around this. So take a look. There may also be this presentation that I mentioned, but there are some other things like chickens happening at the College Township level, and also a rezoning proposal for the Trout Road area, and considering some workforce housing being developed in that area. So take a look at that summary report if any of those topics interest you. And that's all.
Questions or comments for Amy and the Center Region Planning Commission? Okay, let's move on. Thank you, Amy, very much. George.
It's time.
Yeah, the technical committee of the CCMPO met on February 10th. It was the first meeting since November, so it was a little long overdue. There were presentations with respect to a new initiative PennDOT's taken up. It's called the Pathways Initiative. And it's basically what it is another Pell process they're going through to start to identify ways of filling the funding gap that's becoming increasingly more obvious as it relates to the shortage of gas tax revenues. Those revenues provide the vast majority of highway funding in the state, and the shortfall is stacking up to be pretty staggering in the billions. So hang on to your ankles, because there's going to be some fee structure changes. I can assure you of that. How significant they'll be is yet to be determined. But there's a Pell process in place that they're looking to wrap up by July for presentation of a list of some 6 or 8 alternative funding suggestions, a lot of them involving tolls, some for highways, some for bridges, many which would not hopefully impact us here in District 2. They appear as though they would be more directed towards urban areas. But that was one of the presentations. There was really no presentation on the Route 80 connector project, which is ongoing, of course. They have the comments on what was their preliminary draft that was sent out, and that Harris Township responded to, along with the other townships. And they have those responses and are looking to officially respond to those, and then we'll move forward. They said by our March meeting, we should have some meaningful presentation about where they're at with some alternative, with some actual roadway alternatives.
George, we did, by the way, hear back from PennDOT on our comments, and they basically told us a whole lot of nothing.
Yeah.
They were like,
Well,
thanks.
that's par for the course.
One of the things the supervisors, one of the comments we sent back was that we think the name of the project should not be the State College Area Connector Project, but should be the Route 80 Connector Project. And PennDOT was like, nope, no, we're going to keep it State College Area Connector. And we sent them our official statement on the road, which we adopted in 2017, which is that we don't want the road coming through Harris Township. And they were like, well, we haven't picked the alignment, but thanks for nothing. So it was, yeah.
Pretty standard fare, but whenever I refer to it in the meetings, I call it the Route 80 connector.
Good.
And we'll continue to do so, by the way.
Good.
And then there was discussions about this new performance-based planning and programming, which is yet to be seen. Bureaucratic nightmare, in my opinion. We'll see where it goes, but it looks like ways of dipping into districts and pulling funding out of their pockets, if you ask me. I had a problem with the statistics that were being used to set the targets, but unfortunately the targets are being passed on as they were developed, and our target for fatalities in District 2 is only 1 fatality, since the 2019 number came in at 1 fatality miraculously, despite being 13 and 16 fatalities the 2 years before. But they're moving on with it, or at least they will be after next Tuesday's coordinating committee meeting, most likely. And that's pretty much about, well, that'll do it.
Thank you, George. Does anybody have comments or questions on the technical committee report or activities? Okay, thank you again, Amy and George, for representing the township to the commission and the committee. Amy, you want to walk us through number 8, recent actions by the Board of Supervisors, please?
Sure. The board approved the Sickler Kane minor subdivision plan, the Leroy Bickle Jr. minor subdivision plan, and the site plan for the property next to Angelo's. There's tax parcel numbers in there. They also approved, if you remember, you discussed the non-building waiver for the Bickle plan, and they approved the non-building waiver for sewage facilities planning for that plan. We're undergoing a little bit of legal review on it because a DEP official told us that maybe we couldn't actually do that because it would violate our sewage management ordinance. So the solicitor's reviewing it. He preliminarily did not see that it would be a violation of our sewage management ordinance, but we sent back a follow-up question just to confirm that. So we should hear back from him in the next day or so on that.
Interesting how the interplay between the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors on some of these issues works itself out sometimes. Thank you for that. Okay. Anybody else have comments or questions? It's been kind of a wide-ranging meeting on both the small term and small level and higher level, short term and long term items. Any other comments or questions before we wrap up?
Should we plan on doing meetings virtually for the next 3-4 months, do we figure?
Yeah, because right now with the way the COVID cases are spiking again in Center County, but it's because the Penn State students came back and they're being tested. So our doors are still locked at the township office. Probably likely the beginning of March we'll unlock those doors because our tax bills will go out and our cases should level off by then. But I don't see us going back to in-person meetings until maybe like in person in a not in a park, but in the township meeting room, like maybe July timeframe. I think it all depends. I think if we can do some of your meetings outside, I would love to try that because that has worked well with the Shade Tree Commission and the Parks and Rec Committee. We have beautiful parks, and we have, they have beautiful pavilions, and it's a great way to get out and, and do some of these tours that Chris also had the idea to do. So we'll get creative, because I think everyone's getting zoomed out. So we'll try to get creative, but for the next couple months, plan on either Zoom or in a park.
But I do think we should be flexible. If we've got a really beautiful Monday evening planning commission in March, that's certainly, it doesn't seem it right now, but it's possible. Probably not till April or May, but let's consider going outside if we can, as soon as we can.
Yeah, we just have to be mindful that it still gets dark relatively early in April and May. So we would have to look at maybe moving the meeting time up
Yeah,
a little bit to accommodate that.
yep. Or bring your Coleman lantern. Okay.
Bring your torches.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn this meeting, please?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor of adjourning tonight's planning commission meeting? Aye.
Aye.
All righty. Any